I want to start this video by saying no hate to Jaaru. He gets enough shit, and I don't want to add to that fire. So this video is going to have 3 separate parts to it. In the first part, I'm going to directly attack points Jaaru makes in the video. Only a few, though, I can't go through all of them. Then I'm going to give my own separate reasoning for why his logic is in general incorrect. And then I'm going to use the community's response to not only his theory, but before that, to create a conclusion as to why he's at least partially wrong. The main point I want to attack from Jaaru's video is the point he makes that in the future, people will be disappointed if their suspension of disbelief is broken by the game. However, I want to say that his whole theory about Azrael being the soul that you are controlling as the player would only really come into play later on in the game. That would be a late game reveal. People would have already sunk in hours into the game, and there is no reason that we would think that people wouldn't come to the conclusion earlier than that the community came to, which is, oh, I am the thing controlling it, I'm not playing as something controlling Chris. And the main reason Jaaru thinks that the soul isn't Chris is because Jaaru thinks that it would be a bad writing decision, and that Jaaru trusts Toby's writing too much to make people's suspension of disbelief broken like that. However, Chapter 1's ending alone, let alone with Chapter 2's, and I'm sure the future ones forward, would already paint the vision in your mind that, oh, the red soul is me controlling Chris. And that dismantles Jaaru's main reasoning for why it shouldn't be the player. Because if the red soul being the player is really this big, crushing reveal and ruins the game, then it doesn't matter if it's proven false later on, because it would already ruin the game from the moment somebody completed Chapter 1, or at least early on in the game before the halfway point, because I don't think most people would come to a different conclusion. So now on to me disproving that this breaks suspension of disbelief. I also lied about this being a 3-part argument because frankly I just don't want to re-record the argument from earlier, and I'm just going to combine the things I was going to say in 2 and 3 into one big long speech. So Jaaru claims that the reveal of the red soul being the player ruins the suspension of disbelief and therefore ruins the game for the players because it makes the players not care about the characters at all, which obviously ruins the main narrative of the game because Toby wants you to care about those characters, obviously. My main counterpoint here is the community still cares about the characters despite this reveal being what most of them believe. That alone disproves Jaaru's entire point. And it's not even like they're all Undertale fans blinded by the fact of, ooh, it's Undertale again. There are tons of new fans that both care about the Deltarune characters and believe the red soul is the player. And I don't think there's a way that Jaaru's language in the video could really counter that point. And now I want to make a kind of bold claim about Jaaru's reasoning here. I think Jaaru thinks this, not because it's an objective writing problem, but because it ruins Jaaru's specific suspension of disbelief. For example, Jaaru attacks Doki Doki Literature Club, a critically acclaimed game, and uses it as an example because it breaks Jaaru's suspension of disbelief and that of some critics. But if this problem is so big that it's an apparent massive flaw, then why don't most people care? And don't even get me started on the fact that there are other games that do this exact thing that are also critically acclaimed and do it very well. An example that comes to mind is Off. And this is where I think where the miscommunication comes from. It's not that Jaaru is stupid and doesn't understand meta-narratives. It's that Jaaru's the only person that cares about separating the meta-narrative. The great majority of people who have played Undertale and Deltarune don't care if the player is a canonical entity in the universe, and most of them think the player is, at least to some degree. But Jaaru does. And if there was reason to believe Toby Fox also thought this same way, that would be great evidence for why Jaaru's correct, but Toby clearly doesn't. Statements he says in the localization book make a lot of fans of Frisk mad because of how important it is that he clarifies that the player is an entity that exists. He does a lot of throwing away Frisk's agency in that book, partially because he needs to clarify it to the localization team to get his vision across, even if that's not actually the way he thinks it's the easiest way to get the point across to the localization team to carry out his vision, but also partially because the meta-narrative is kinda canon to the normal narrative of the game. Is it possible Jaaru's right? Yes, but a great scientist once said that the most likely answer is usually the answer with the least resistance, and Jaaru's explanation of the player controlling an entity that is also controlling Chris is a bit much. Additionally, a main point Jaaru makes is that he doesn't believe that Gaster personally summoned him into the world of Deltarune, but there is a way to explain this. I mean, for starters, the great majority of the Deltarune community, at least the prolific figures, play this game on launch, which means that we were called by Gaster. But even ignoring that, we're assuming that the direct story here is that Gaster summoned the entity, but it's possible he didn't summon the entity on purpose, at least not the specific entity. Maybe he didn't summon the player specifically. What if Gaster makes a machine that calls the most determined entity in the universe, you know, a being above their reality, the player, for example, and us being the player just so happen to be called there because of determination? Because, regardless of the way you see it, we are determined to play the game, play the different routes, use the different saves, and more importantly to this specific discussion I'm having right now, we're determined to consume content, something very important to the genocide route. Kara was called because we consume consumed every last bit of that world to its completion, and Gaster would have summoned us because Gaster wants Deltarune to be a game. My name is your name, the demon that comes when you call its name, the demon that craves EXP, levels, gold, the feeling of a stat going up. Kara is a representation of us that is talking to us, the player. And if a representation of us is the demon that comes when you call its name to raise stats and be determined, that sounds just like what Gaster needs, doesn't it? But anyway, meta-analysis at the end of the video aside, thank you for watching. I have a pre-existing Undertale Deltarune soul theory that you may enjoy watching. Do I think it's 100% correct? Maybe not, but hey, I think it's an interesting analysis regardless. I also recently released a new channel trailer, so if you want to know what the rest of the channel is about, consider watching that. But without any further ado, this is the end, so like and subscribe!